Hello and welcome to your first session, which is looking at Duty 1. We're going to be covering the knowledge requirements within this session, and today we're going to be looking at knowledge 1 to 6, 13 and 14. So what we're going to do, we're just going to take you straight to this the login screen and get started. So just bear with me. There we go. And hopefully we're there. So you've got your login screen. Here we've got our PowerPoints for the session, so we understand where the PowerPoints are. And here we've got our online learning. So in Knowledge 1 then, for Duty 1, we're going to click on our learning aims and we're going to start. So let's bring it up. So by the end of today's session, we're going to have a clear understanding of the importance of shaping organisations' missions, cultures, and values. So we'll look at some of the theoretical frameworks and we'll look at how you're going to be doing that within your service. We'll look to gain knowledge and skills in organisation structures. We'll look at different models, diversity, globalisation, and we'll have a look at that horizon screening process, as well as some governance, accountability, technology, and policy. We'll also look at the roles of ethics and values around setting the strategic direction. We'll look at developing an understanding of external social and political and diplomatic support and how that influences our stakeholders. And we'll look at to develop knowledge and skills in the working of we'll have a look at the workings of boards and other company leadership structures. The other learning outcomes then applies to next week's sessions. Good. So here we can see exactly what we're working on. We're working on Duty 1. The aim of today really is to get your head around Duty 1, understand some of these policies, theories, frameworks, and models, and look at how we're going to use those moving forward, and especially when we think about your endpoint assessment, which is around this business case study. So, shaping your organization's missions, cultures, and values really looks at the following points on here. So, it's really important within your home or your service that you have a very clear, defined mission, and the mission gives purpose to the organization. So the mission should make sense to the stakeholders and should relate directly to the culture of your organization and the values of your organization. So what would be a really good exercise after today, and again with your notes, pen and paper, just think about your mission and think about your home's mission, and then go out and speak to your staff. Talk to them and say, look, do you understand our mission? What is it we're doing? And I bet anything you like, they can't necessarily describe it in the way that you see it. And the thing with leadership, we hold it in our mind's eye, or we build it up because we know it so well. We just need to make sure that that's replicated across our organization. And therefore, we need to then think about how we encompass our mission into our everyday behaviors. So it's our philosophy of care. So have we got it in our business plan? Is it in our policies and procedures? Is it clear on our website? And is it replicated through staff behavior? Now, what I would say is if your mission feels a bit woolly or it doesn't feel real, maybe there's a piece of work that you can do here within your organization and do maybe some group work where you can sit down with your teams, collaborate, come up with some very clear missions, or indeed include your stakeholders, send out a survey to them and just say, look, we're looking at revisiting our mission because it sets the tone for our culture and our values. How do you see it? What do you think the key features are? Because off of that, you're going to then create your visions, your values, your culture, and maybe your KPIs, your key performance indicators, or your key business indicators. Now, what's really important then, think about those KPIs, key performance indicators or key business indicators, that aligns to your goals and your objectives. So aligning your mission to the value and to the behaviors. And if we think about behaviors, how do we then encompass that behavior through our staff, through our products, and through our services? So what is it that we're going to do to replicate all of this? And is it the case that what we need to do is look at the way that we recruit and select staff to our organisation? So do we need to be doing some value-based interviewing and some competency-based interviewing? And ultimately, I think a great way of interviewing staff is having your missions on your front page, because it's a great way to see whether someone's done a bit of research, and ask them, just say, look, you know, you're applying for a job with us. What in particular is it that's led you to come to us? Why would you like to work with us? And it's very rare that I hear in interviews, oh, I was on your website and I really liked what your service stood for. And there's something that I've been working with over the last couple of years, and this person was offered a job. And when they sat down and they looked at the values of the organisation, they just didn't align with her, and therefore she turned the job down. And I think that's really admirable, because if you're going to work for an organisation and your belief system is very different to their belief system, ultimately, it's never going to work. You're never going to have job satisfaction. You're always going to feel that something's not quite right. Where if you can start on the same, I really like what this stands for, the culture, the behaviour becomes very easy to see. And when we talk about behaviours, it's very obvious from an inspector's point that they're embedded. So, for example, and what I mean by this is, if we talk about we have high standards of infection control, great. That's a great key business indicator. You know, it's a great thing to have. But how is that seen? And ultimately, staff that are in a well-led service naturally go straight for gloves and aprons and hand wash. Naturally. You can spot somebody that doesn't do it as part of their culture because they have to think, and you can see them edging towards the gloves, and then you think, oh no, I haven't washed my hands first. Where if it's a behaviour, they go straight to hand washing, they go straight to PPE. And it's a behaviour that you can see. So we want this modelling of our values to really replicate through the culture. And again, we can say we have an open door policy. What does that mean? What does it look like? What are we looking for there within those behaviours, the culture of the home? So go back to your values, go back to your mission statements, and look at, if I were an inspector, what is it that I would want them to see? And can I see that? Because there's no point having a culture or a strapline that says we're open to learning, we're transparent about this, but then that's not what you're seeing from a culture point. And it takes a long time. It takes a long time to change behavior. It takes a long time to create culture. So just bear that in mind. When we think about this, we also then have to think about how we communicate within that culture. So ultimately, are we a good communicator? If we go back to those models of Shannon and Weaver, the sender, the receiver, are we clear, or does it come across as quite muddled? So are we sending out newsletters? Do we have an updated website? Have we got an open door policy? Do we have accessibility to policies and procedures? Do we have a stakeholder voice? Do we have a voice of our service users or customers? Do we have a voice of our staff? And how is that all pulled together? So what theories and frameworks and what modelling are you going to use? Does your home, does your service, does your business have a communication strategy? And the communication strategy looks at how we can improve this sender receiver, but equally take into account the values. So if we said we're a listening organisation, what does that look like? Because there are many organisations out there that say they're customer focused, and then you get an AI robot. just saying? Does that mirror what we're trying to replicate here? And yes, it may be that we're a listening service, but we're also advancing in technology. So is it time then to review that strap line in line with innovation, technology, and growth? Ultimately, as we do that, we need to be leading by example. So for us as leaders and senior leaders from top down, are we ensuring the integrity, the values, the honesty, that transparency, the openness? Is that role modeled from top down? So when we talk about leading by example, are we involved in the training? Do we get our hands dirty? Are we seen around the place living the values and the cultures? Do we talk to people with the respect? Are we equalizing in the business, or are we very much a them and us? So what does that leading by example look like for you? How do you want your values and your culture to replicate or be replicated? And how do you ensure that all of that is taking place in line with your values? So again, just thinking about your own performance management, because when you're a senior leader, when you're a director of an organization, and I've been there, where do you get your support from? Where are you getting your ideas? Where are you getting your supervision? Where are you getting your contemporary practice and keeping up to date with standards? Shaping the visions and values of an organization clearly looks at encouraging that feedback, that stakeholder feedback. And the thing with feedback, it should be open, it should be transparent. And really, by now, we should all be using technology. There's many AI advances here. So again, we could be using things such as Jotform, SurveyMonkey, or any of those AI apps now that are bringing it all together to manage. But ultimately, how are we sending that out? And what do we do with that data once we've collected it? So how are we analysing that data? How often are we doing that data? And what does that look like? So are you working in line with an ISO 9001 standard? Have you got, is it a 6 monthly? Is it an annual thing? And do you do something like you said we did? Or are you doing something a bit more subtly in your newsletters or bulletins? And equally, not being defensive about it. So when we look at social media and we look at the negative feedback online, how are we addressing that? Are we thanking people for their negative comments? And we saying, you know, we strive to always quality improve our services. We thank you for your honesty in this matter. We're going to look into it. So having your feedback strategy is really important to managing feedback in an effective manner. And, you know, we're not going to sit here and look at feedback models at level 7. We know how it should be given. We know that there's different styles of feedback. But for you as a senior leader, how are you managing that across the organization? And how are you testing its reliability and its sample size? So when we put feedback out there, how do you know that the feedback's genuine? How are you quality assuring that as a senior leader? So are you truly getting feedback from stakeholders, or have you got somebody telling you what you want to hear? Because when we have people that tell us what we want to hear, it's really unhelpful. True, good quality feedback is always honesty. And I tend to be one of those people that would rather somebody be just put it in your own words. I'm not going to be offended. And if you do hear something, don't become defensive on it, learn from it. Because ultimately, if somebody says your service is poor, if somebody says this isn't right, that's their lived experience. You may not agree with it, but you don't want to become defensive about it. What you want to do is understand that lived experience that they've been through, and you want to have that culture of continual quality improvement and that learning from it. Equally, when we look around our visions, values, and culture, we do look at diversity and inclusion. And diversity and inclusion is about this whole background of recognizing where everyone comes from and that sense of involvement to the community. But I was once challenged in an audit of mine, and they said to me around the LGBT agenda, they said, how many people do you have in this group? And I said, well, there's two, because of the where I was working at the time. It was a very quiet area of the country. And the inspector said to me, well, okay, so can you show me your openness to inclusion? And I said, well, I've got a policy. They said, great, but how does that policy work? Show me your openness, show me your transparency for this. And when I started to break it down, I thought, well, I know that I'm inclusive. I know our business is. And I just assumed, rightly or wrongly, that all the mechanisms were there. Actually, it transpired when I started to dig a little bit deeper, it was all top lip service. And even though my argument was that I'm not in that area of the country, so the area of the country that I am, it's not a very diverse part of the country. How can I prove this? And what I needed to do was then look at the demographics, look at the population, and then look at the percentage that I had. Because it transpired that actually, when I broke it down to the demographics, so the area of the country and the percentage, I actually was above national average. But I couldn't have that argument because I hadn't done that piece of work. And I was kicking myself afterwards because I made myself look foolish in front of an inspector. But actually, I could have said, well, our statistical data shows we're like 80% nationally on that particular group. That would have been the end of the subject. But because I couldn't say that, the numbers that I was saying just seemed disproportionate, but they weren't statistically. So when people say, are you inclusive service? And we feel we are, then how are we going to evidence that? Because it's not just a case of saying, I've got a policy, it's in our statement. It's about, you can have all the policies in the world, it doesn't prove that they're working. And actually what it shows to an inspector is that it's not working because inadvertently, they will say, but your numbers are quite low. So just bear that in mind when we think about our missions, culture, and values. Because if we make a sweeping statement such as we have a Localism Act, then what does your local community, look like? How are you going to evidence that? Bear that in mind. Equally, recognising rewards around your organisation's missions, cultures, and values is a great thing, because positive reinforcement is a great way to change culture. And we know about change cycles and all that stuff, so we're not going there on this level. But recognising that in a positive way is really helpful, because the more we recognise great role modelling, the more we're able to influence and change that behaviour. So it's very much like that whole thing when we get one piece of bad feedback, 100 people hear about it, but we do something good, only 5 people hear about it. We kind of need to flip that around. So when something bad happens, only 10 people hear about it, but when something good happens, 1,000 people hear about it. So we need to turn that negative model around. Reward and recognition is really important, fundamentally from a senior level point. And I know I'm not teaching you all to suck eggs on this one, but there are great frameworks out there. So the Investors in People framework is a great framework for you as a senior leader to take the best bits from it and implement some of that into your organization. Now, I'm not suggesting that you need to pay for all of these fancy frameworks, because again, I know money's tight, but you could just do a bit of research. You could look at what that looks like. So Investors in People have their tiered approach. But equally, there's a process out there called Matrix. And Matrix is about good quality information, advice, and guidance to us, to the people that we work with within education. And whilst I appreciate you're probably not an education provider, loosely in brackets, you are providing education. Of course you are. We do inductions for our staff. We do teaching and learning. We do maybe psychoeducation to the people we look after. The basic principles of Matrix is all about good quality information, advice, and guidance. So again, taking the best bits from that is a really important thing to do. So when we monitor and evaluate our processes around our missions, cultures, and values, what we're looking for from an inspection point is the journey in. Did you have a pre-meeting? What was that agenda like? How do people collaborate? Where did those ideas come from? Can you evidence that? When you did your mission, culture, and values, did you have several versions? Now, again, another true story. I was in an organisation and I was responsible for preparing a self-assessment report. We've got the director for quality assurance who was very good at what they did. And we had this conversation and I knew Ofsted was going to be coming in. So think of Ofsted like CQC. And ultimately, it was all about demonstrating exactly what we're talking about here. Can you demonstrate the growth of your organization? Can you demonstrate quite clearly where inspiration comes from, where the values spring from, where the culture springs from, and where that collaboration around communication and leadership and effectiveness all comes from? And the answer is, unless your documentation has gone through several to 9 rewrites, it's probably unlikely. And when we sat down with all the chief inspectors, I had a little joke with the director at the time and Ofsted, and I said, oh, this person's complaining at me that I made them do it 9 times. And the chief inspector turned around and said, that's exactly what I'd expect to see. And I kind of poked them and went, see, told you so. I wasn't being mean. But actually, for us to end up with a good, solid foundation, it has to be tested. So who is doing that testing with you? When you're going through that evaluation process, when you are reflecting upon what is said, who is pushing you to go, explain that a bit more? What does that actually mean? Because again, we can be all very opinionated within what we're reading, or we can be emotionally based, or we can be slightly biased. What we want to see is actually that we're being stretched and challenged, and that as we're being stretched and challenged, it pushes us to think more concisely about what it is we're trying to achieve. Ultimately, your evaluation process needs to show plan, do, review. So again, if we go back to our IIP frameworks, so planning, what does that look like? Doing, what does that look like? Reviewing, what does that look like? And I love plan, do, review. I think it's such a simple strategy, but such an effective strategy when thinking about the steps in which we need to go through. And when we think about the endpoint assessment for senior leader, that plan, do, review model is going to be really important, because you are going to be given a significant period of time to produce whatever it is you're producing. What we would probably expect to see during that process is that plan, do, review stage. So this is the background. This is our executive summary. This is where we're going. This is what we're going to do, but this is how we're going to review it. Or you may have already got to a plan, do, review in your business planning stages. So just think about your monitoring and evaluation strategies. They're quite wide. There's lots of different tools out there. When you start to dig deeper into the learning material, you're going to understand that. Equally, when we look at collaboration and teamwork, so we want to work on a multidisciplinary level. We want to work with other organizations. We want to sense a community and foster that. But we also want to align ourselves to other organizations that have those similar values, because I've worked in industry now for a very long time where you've got organizations out there that are happy to take, but they're not giving. And the one thing that really grinds me as a senior leader is sofa surfers. If you're just going to sit back and take, then that's not collaboration. That's not participation. That's not, it doesn't follow any of that leading by example and maintaining professional standards. But being a hands-on leader involves you having innovation and change, because actually that's what leadership is. Managers are the people that just follow instructions. We are the generation in this program of innovation and leadership. And part of that innovation and leadership is that sense of working with people, promoting best practice. And I'm sure I said somewhere in a previous video that I used to be part of a breakfast club where organizations come together and they'd have breakfast and they'd all talk and share their ideas and talk about the frustrations and local economy and political stuff. But then they would be able to have that sense of bringing it back together. And I just thought, what a really lovely way of working. You know, you're all having breakfast and you're all just sharing best practice. And I get the fact that we've had COVID and all of this stuff. But we have innovation now. We can have Zoom breakfast clubs where we could prepare and plan and think and strategize. Because sometimes as a leader, it's a very lonely place to sit where you're coming up with ideas and what you have is a lot of resistance. So a lot of people go, oh, that won't work, that won't work. And I always say to people, you know, anyone can throw a grenade in and say it won't work. But what's really helpful is coming up with why you don't think it will work and what do you think would work. And if you have that culture, you tend to bring and promote innovation rather than that kind of negative Nelly where people keep bringing you down. So think about that. Think about how you're going to collaborate. Accountability and responsibility is obviously key to those missions, values, and cultures. When you create your business plan, when you look at your missions, values, and cultures, you're in essence creating a set of business indicators, a set of processes to achieve your end goal, your plan, do, review part. So having accountability is really important because what tends to happen throughout the systems is people will blame and you end up in this culture where people can just stand back and not contribute as much as everyone else. When you have clear lines of responsibility and clear lines of accountability, it becomes a lot easier to manage because, again, we want to make sure that we work in a fair and transparent system. So making sure we have accountability is really important. Equally, that culture of continual improvement, so that culture of quality improvement cycle is really important. Making sure that you have policies and procedures in way to be transparent, making sure that you have those processes for quality improvement, and making sure that when we have a culture of continually learning, that people don't sit back and go, oh, that will never work, because actually that's a behavior that becomes quite easy to spot. And that behavior becomes really toxic really quickly. So making sure that we are an organization of continual quality improvements, having that probably in one of your visions or values or your culture is key to success and growth, because people don't like change. We know that. But if you're joining an organization which has its strapline, a front line that you are part of quality improvement and innovation, you're basically saying to applicants, if you don't like change, we're probably not the right company for you. Because changes are coming in every organization, whether that's through AI and maintaining new jobs, whether that's through government agenda, whether that's through national emergencies. We have to work through this continual change culture. And equally, we see it all the time, and we saw it during COVID. Everybody had to step up to the next level. And we had people go, but that's not my responsibility. And we had others that just stepped up and flew with it. And because of that change culture, we have better ways of working. So thinking about your quality improvement processes, your continual quality cycles, how will that shape your values, visions, and culture? Equally, embracing change. So encouraging your staff to think more flexibly. Flexible thinking is an emotional intelligence strategy. So when we think about emotional intelligence, how are you measuring your staff's resilience and emotional intelligence levels? Because if we recruit staff with poor emotional resilience and emotional intelligence, ultimately you are kind of setting yourself up to fail in the long run. If we are able to explain quite clearly what emotional intelligence looks like, what emotional resilience is. We're being very, very transparent about that behavior that we want behind it. And ultimately, flexible thinking is part of that. And there are some people out there that are big picture, visionary people. I like to think that I'm a big picture person, and I work really well in problem solving. I work well at innovation. And then there's that small, detailed people, but their strengths are, but I'm great at the small detail. I'm great at the bits that you've missed. So there is this combination balance that you want, but what you don't want is an organization of lots of narrow thinking. So think about that balance on how you're going to have that. But equally, think about how you are going to embrace change. What does your change cycle look like? How do you support it? Celebrating success. So again, we go back to that rewards and recognition piece at the top. Now, within your learning, you are expected to go online and have a look and do some extended reading. So here, I've given you several companies that look at shaping organizations, missions, values, and cultures. And again, just defining them, leading by example, looking at them. So there's some things there for you to go away and research. Equally, there's some assessment tools here that you might want to have a look at. You'll need these assessment tools when you think about your endpoint assessment. There are some theories there that you would need to look at. So organizational culture theory looks at those emphasizing the shapes and the beliefs of your system, and then transformational leadership theories. So whilst you don't need to know all of the theories here, you definitely need to know those two as a minimum, because when you start to think about your endpoint assessment project, you are going to need to be able to reference in some theories at level 7. So please do go online, look at those theories, and think about how you can embed those theories within your organization. Equally, there are some frameworks out there to help you work. So we've talked about investors in people and matrix, but there are some missions, values, and visions frameworks out there. So again, have a look at those. There's some culture frameworks which you can have a look at, some organizational change frameworks, and some ethics and value frameworks. So lots of different frameworks there for you to have a look at. So quite a lot to get your head around there straight away. But actually, I think what tends to happen in a lot of our businesses go, we've done it, and we just move on, and it was just a piece of work setting up an organization. But this, your missions, cultures, and values are your building blocks to success. If they are not right, I can absolutely assure you, you will never achieve what your business plan is set out to do. Setting strong missions, cultures, and values is really important. So just think about, once you've set it, once you've been through all of that, once you've developed it, how is it? What is it you're going to do to maintain it and keep it where it needs to be? And what does that review process look like? How do you constantly celebrate that success? So I think we'll stop there before we move on to the next one. So just hit pause. Great. Okay, so welcome back. Now I'm going to look at K2. And here we're going to look at organizational structure. Now, there are lots of different organizational grounds out there. There's lots of different ways of structuring your business legally and for the benefit of your organization. We're also going to look at some business modeling. We'll look at some diversity issues there. We'll look at some globalization stuff, some horizon scanning and other governance and accountability processes. So let's just talk about your organizational structure. Now, it's kind of a given that every organization has its organizational structure. And sometimes you start with the old-fashioned one where you've got the CEO at the top, then you've got your managers, then you've got this line, and then it comes down. Or there are other organizational structures where you're all on the same level and it comes down. It's really important for you as a senior leader to think about how information, so going back to communication in K1, how information flows up and down your organization. And that will come from a good organizational structure. Equally, you want to think about, does my organizational structure allow for sustainability and growth? So does the structure allow you to work along a line, or are you going to go up and down that line? So you've got your flat lines, you've got your matrices, there's a network structure. So do a little bit of research, have a look at what you've got, justify whether or not your organizational structure works, because when you do your business planning, when you look at your report writing, that's going to be really important to understanding the processes that you have and to be able to describe why you have your certain organizational structure. Your business modeling then falls off the back of that. So understanding how you analyze, plan, and manage your operations. So your business modeling includes your financial modeling, your strategic modeling, and your operational modeling. And for example, what we mean by that is, how are you setting up? What does that look like? Are you having areas? Are you having singular locations? And there are for and against on all of these. So true story, I was in an organization and I was sitting there, I could see lots of risks. And each business in their own right were floated, sustainable, but all carried risk. Now, the reality is, if they were all set up as legal entities, then you eliminate risk across the organization. And the best way to describe this is the Virgin Group. If you look at what Richard Branson's done, he's got his branding across the organization, but each part is separate in its own entirety. So if one goes down, the others are okay. But branding across the same also then means brand damage. So if one home or one service or one business has a problem, it taints them all. So branding, legal structure. So there's for and against. Now, what happened is we was at a business meeting. I'm sitting there going, risk, think about it. I'd got somebody from marketing going, oh no, but think about your brand identity, blah, 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 blah. It'll be a much stronger project to push and sell. And of course, what happened? One went down, the whole lot collapsed. So for and against. Ultimately, if they were all separate in their own identity, maybe under a group, under a legal identity, it would have been much stronger. If you lose one, you've got limitation against the others. So I wonder whether, as leaders, we're in this situation where having large company, large organizations, whether or not you can survive negative stuff. Because the problem that we've got now is this access to information. And access to information, again, going back to that previous analogy, one good comment, maybe 10, 15 people, one bad comment, thousands of people. Can a business recover from damage from another site? Because you're all tarnished on the same brush. Or if you're all separate legal identities, does that to you better? But anyway, think about your modeling there. Diversity then, understanding that inclusion piece, the backgrounds, experiences. So understanding about where are you selling, who are you selling to, who are your customers, how do you get to wider demographics, wider groups. Understanding different cultures and backgrounds is really useful to your strategies for modeling, because again, if we look at education, for example, I think sadly in the United Kingdom, this is just my opinion, I don't think education has the same value as what it does in maybe Asia or Bangladesh or India, where they see it as the key to opening up all the doors, and they see it as something to strive for. We seem to have a very poor response here in the UK, which is, oh, it's my right, everyone gets it, it's lost its meaning. So, but understanding that richness in that particular community group would definitely make you be able to sell and push harder to that area than maybe here. But equally, if we think about health and social care, there's a lot of communities out there that care for their own. So there's a lot of stigma around using care services and paying for this. Because again, it's seen as maybe a failing or whatever. So understanding their barriers can help you write good marketing strategies to kind of crack some of that stuff. Looking then at global and horizon screening processes. So looking at your organization, how your organization operates, looking at across political, economic, social, technology trends will give you an idea about how you can manage your business. And that's really important when we think about some of the stuff that we've recently gone through. So like COVID or AI technology, which is the fourth revolution. How are we going to use that? And the problem is sometimes we just put our head down and we silo work. The problem with silo working is eventually you're going to be hit and you're then going to be sitting there going, oh God, I wish I was paying more attention politically or economically to what's going on. And again, I'll give you another story. So back in 2012, I was running an international college. So we just set up from scratch. We were awarded an A+ rating, which was the highly trusted status. We got outstanding in all of our systems and procedures. We got outstanding on our curriculum. Theresa May came into power, and overnight we lost a £2.5 million contract. And that was because the political agenda there was to reduce immigration. Now, I know what's going on in the health and social care field at the moment. So if we look at that as a typical example, tier 2, we've got lots of people coming over, working in those lower skilled job or highly skilled jobs to try and fill those vacancies. The problem that we have with this is its sustainability. Are we just putting a plaster on a hemorrhage? And if we are putting the plaster on the hemorrhage, what background work are we doing to maintain that same level of business continuity for sustainability for a stronger future? Because ultimately, if we think about what's in it for me, I'll with them. We've got people coming here, they're taking the jobs, they're working because that's exactly what we need and they've done nothing wrong. And they have the absolute right to then leave once they've had their tick boxes filled and they get visas or their time's up. But ultimately what happens is our retention just ends up to where it was. And we've invested all of this money, time and effort into a very short-visioned solution. So we need to be thinking about politically what happens if Conservatives turn around and go, you know what, we need to tighten up the tier 2. And overnight, tier 2 goes. You're sitting there with the same problem that you had before. You've had the same risk, but you've not been able to risk mitigate anything. So just bear that in mind. When we think about our structure and our organisation and we talk about leadership, we need to be thinking about our governance and accountability. So going back to what we said in K1, which looks at roles, responsibilities in line with visions, values and culture, which looks at the business plans, which looks at how that works forward. But ultimately, if we think about our organisation structure, who is feeding up or who is feeding into us, or are we doing it ourselves to make sure that the governance of the organisation is open, honest and transparent? It's very clear. Now, again, some more true stories. I've been in an organisation where governance has taken place. They've got internal governance. That was apparently very good. They've got external governance, somebody coming in, quality assuring. The problem that we have with this is the level of biasness behind it. Is the person that's quality assuring you, are they doing it because they want you as a customer and therefore they're treating you as a customer? So they're treating you with kindness, they're doing the compassionate bit, they're giving it to you softly, softly, or are they just being honest with you? And I had somebody go in and do a governance, and then I went in and I did some governance, and I was brutally honest. I was just like, I'm not sure what's going on here. That's not very clear and transparent. Then I got feedback. Oh, but our external auditor said, look, this is great. Da, 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 da. And I said, well, but you're paying them however much a day. Of course, they're going to be telling you that. That's what you want to hear. But if you look at this, and I took them to look at it impartially, look at it without biasness, and you tell me what I'm seeing. And that's the thing. As I once was told myself, the way that governance should work is if an alien came down from outer planet, and I've got a friend who uses an alien called Grover, so I'm probably not allowed to use that, it's probably trademarked, but anyway, let's imagine Grover comes down. I'm sure she'll come and send me a message if I'm told off. So Grover's come down, he's an alien from another planet. Is he going to see exactly the same as you? Or is he going to see what he's seeing? So your governance needs to be built on very strong foundations. It needs to be built on that transparency, that openness. And again, within lines of roles and responsibilities, you know, and I've never been somebody that's gone in and governed somewhere. So look, this isn't meeting the requirements, or this isn't meeting here. I'm an evidence-based governor. So if I come into your service, you say, Stephen, can you govern this? I'll have a look at the procedures. I'll have a look at your systems. I'll have a look at what you're trying to achieve. And then I will go yes or no. But if I say no, I will give you the evidence why. So it's very clear on what it is or isn't that you're trying to achieve. And if I say yes, same thing. Because again, it's no good people governing you going, oh, we got 80% in our audit, therefore we're okay. Well, no, you're not, because there's still 20% you haven't done. But there is 80% that you've done well. So what are you doing well at, and why has that worked there? And what are you not doing so good at, and why hasn't that worked there? And then let's do some lessons learned and bring the two together. But what we don't want is this mindset, this strange thinking that good is good enough. The amount of debates that I've been in my 20 plus years of leadership is when people say to me, oh, but it's good. I'm like, but it shouldn't be good, should it? It should be outstanding. You should be aiming for the best possible experience ever, because if you fall short, you're still good. But if you're aiming for good and you fall short, then where are you falling to? Requires improvement. So let's move this mindset away from Chloe's, where it's, you know, I'm aiming for this. Let's move to a culture that I want to be outstanding, and therefore everything I do needs to be the best possible version of what it can be, because if it falls short, it's still going to be really good. Okay, so let's try and change that culture. And again, when you hear somebody say, oh, we'll never achieve that, then your next question is then why? Why are we accepting that as a behavior? Why is that okay for you to settle there? Because actually part of our quality improvement strategy is for us to achieve it. And the thing that I hear also a lot of is, oh, but there's always room for improvement. Yeah, but you can still be outstanding and still improve and be outstanding the next time around. Because here's the logic behind this. If you were good here, and then in 6 months' time or a year's time I come back and you're still good, then you haven't actually improved. You've just maintained good. Ultimately, is that where you want to be? Or do we want to be, look, here I'm good, but now I've got outstanding features. Great. Now I can see that I'm progressing forward. Because the reality is, in the quality improvement cycle, if you're good and you're still good, technically, there's no quality improvement. You've just maintained where you're at. I'm hoping that makes sense. I know it starts to get a bit iffy all over the place, but there is logic to having very clear strategic plans for an outstanding. And again, we can't say, oh, it's impossible, because people are outstanding. Have you read those reports? Have you gone online? Have you looked at what made that service outstanding? And what are the features that you can take from it to implement into yours? One of the things that I do a lot of is I look at inadequate reports. So inadequate from Ofsted, inadequate from CQC, or from FE Week. So I see a lot of stuff that comes in. And then what I do is I try to write lessons around that. So strategies to prevent it, safeguarding features, ways that we can avoid those pitfalls. And that puts us on that governance of good. Our technology policies. So again, we need to be embracing change. We have to be embracing change. It's the way forward. AI is going to start replacing jobs, business admin jobs, lots of stuff like that around care planning. I do a digital standards session. In this digital standards, we're talking about how we as individuals need to maintain our AI skills. I love innovation. I think that's quite a good thing because I have a fear of falling behind. I think I probably have a fear of being like my mum or my grandmother, which is, oh, I can't use that remote control. I have no idea how it works. And then you've got a 3-year-old going plop, plop, plop. And you think, oh, that's embarrassing. So the only way that you can avoid that is by being at the front of it, by embracing it, accepting it, and rolling it out to go, well, continual quality improvement. How do I maintain that? So your technology kind of links in with innovation. You know, ultimately, there are always going to be better ways of working, but how do you know what they are if you're in a silo, and silo working is such a bugbear of mine. Those that have worked with me know that I can't bear it, because if you're working in silo and you're working in silo and you're working in silo, we're not a team. There's no innovation. We're not working together. We're not working to one goal, one vision. We are all pulling away in different strategies. So the only way that we can bring this together is if that we're all on the same page and we all understand that concept and we are all working towards the same goal. It's how it works. It's why Amazon works. It's why the big companies work. They have very simple visions and they use technology and innovation to achieve it. So look at how they've managed it and learn from them. Again, that all then leaks into your strategic planning. And strategic planning is going to be key in this standard because that's what your EPA is based upon. Looking at risk management then, so thinking about your risks, looking at what the risks are, political, economical, social, local. It's not just, I've got a mat on the floor and someone's going to fall over it. It needs to be much bigger than this. We need to be looking at a year down the line, 2 years down the line. So, for example, if you're watching this in 2023, Conservatives are still in power. We're not going to use this as a political station. But if they don't maintain power in 2024, I think was our next election, what is that going to do to the business sector? How is that going to influence what we're doing? Is that going to alter funding or strategies, or is that going to cause a whole pain of cutbacks? Having that political understanding is key for you to survive in politics. And people go, but we don't do politics. Of course you do politics. It's what your business is built upon. Your policies and procedures is politics. Your legislation is politics. CQC, Ofsted, HMRC, politics. Understanding those politics will keep you ahead and ensure that your business is sustainable. And again, moving forward with innovation as needs change and the aging population comes in, who's going to look after them? We need to be thinking about, not now, but in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years' time, how are we still going to be here? Looking then at ethics in leadership, understanding ethics is really important because when you are a leader, you have to make decisions based upon multiple things. And sometimes we can base decisions on impulse, we can make them emotionally, but if we have an ethical framework around decision-making, it just makes us sleep at night. So going back to core principles of ethical leadership, so principles of truth-telling, malevolence, benevolence, to do no harm, autonomy, giving people the power to do what they need to do. So understanding those core elements around ethics gives you a set of principles in which to govern by. Now, the wonderful thing about this standard is you're going to have an opportunity to join the CMI, the Chartered Institute for Management, or the Institute for Leadership and Management. No, it's leadership, they dropped the M. The Institute for Leadership. And both of those have professional standards and ethics. And I think they just make great frameworks for working. So have a look at the Institute for Leadership, have a look at the Chartered Institute for Leadership. and just align yourself, your values, your beliefs, your culture to the one that you think best fits you. Financial management, well, ultimately, unless you know your profit and loss and you know what your ins and outs are, it's going to be very difficult to run your business. Sustainability, leadership, and financial outgoings is really important. You should be able to do your forecasting. You should be able to do your P&L for now. You should be able to do your chartered accounts. You should be able to manage your profit and loss. You should be able to secure additional funding. So alongside with that innovation, that horizon piece, that economic piece, where are you going to go to think about how can I make this more sustainable? And if you are in a government-only contract situation, so be that in social care, be that in education and training, and you are only in a government-funded situation, you are in a whole heap of trouble because it is not sustainable and the risk is immense. You should be at least aiming for 50-50. So 50% self-funded or 50% private funding, so internal revenue, and 50% should be from your government contracts, because if one goes down, you've got sustainability and growth to maintain that. If all of your funding is coming from one source, that is a whole heap of trouble, because if we talk about politics, overnight, you could lose that, job done. Company gone, redundancies, there's no coming back from that. And equally, we have seen what's happened in Birmingham with borough councils going bankrupt, unable to pay for care organisations, and care organisations overnight are having to close because they are now in millions of pounds worth of debt for no fault of their own, but because their supply chain has been turned off. So just think about how you're going to manage that. Now, I'm in a very privileged position. I go into a lot of different care homes, and the best models of care are those that have private beds and fully funded beds, and not just the government from NHS. And it's a bit here, a bit here, a bit here, and a bit here. And that's how your funding should be, because if it's all in one pot, you're in a whole heap of trouble. Thinking about your change management, again, going back to those core principles of change, understanding that as a culture, going back to your stakeholders is really important, and then obviously mitigating any resistance there. But also trying that buy-in piece. You know, we know that if you bring in something new, it's going to be 6 months down the line before you see that behavioural change. And that's because you've got three types of people. You've got I can see innovation working, this is a great idea. You've got the negative Nelly, oh, it'll never work. And then you've got the sitting on the fence. And the sitting on the fence are the ones that I really despise. But you know what? It's what makes the world tick. So those that believe change will work will make it happen. They will try their best. They'll go out their way. And of course, those that say it won't work, well, of course they're not going to try. Why would they try? They've already told you it's going to fail. This is a waste of time. And then what happens is the ones on the fence are your swing voters, because when it starts to work, you win people over. When it starts to fail, you lose support. And of course, you've then lost that swing vote. So it's really important in your change model. Know who your negative Nellies are. Know who your sitting on the fence people are. And the people on the fence, get them over to your side as soon as you can, because then you can get this change cycle going a little bit quicker. Equally under that, your talent management. So looking at your visions, values, and culture, looking at your business indicators, looking at your roles and responsibilities, goes down to talent management. So who's responsible for your talent? Is it HR? Is it you? If you're a new startup organization, it's probably going to be you. If you're lucky enough to have a HR department, great. I'm sure they'll manage that really well. But talent management is a real key to success, because finding the right person with the right values, the right culture, the right skills is what you need to grow your business. And if you can't find those people, fine. What are you going to do to grow them? So are you going to grow your own? And I'm a great fan for growing your own, but equally I understand the benefits of bringing in new talent, because new talent brings in new innovation, new ideas, and new ways of working. So have you got a balance there? So think about your talent management. Marketing and branding. So again, we've talked about marketing and branding and the risks on both sides. Customer experience, we spoke about earlier in that quality improvement cycle. How are you going to maintain that? What's the voice of the customer? How do you manage that? What does success look like? How are you managing feedback? How are you getting that out there? Corporate responsibility. I love corporate responsibility because ultimately we should all be responsible for something. You will see in a lot of the standards now, we're bringing in carbon net zero by 2050. That is indeed a corporate social responsibility. 2050, 25 years. It sounds quite a long way off. It's not that long when you think about you've got to do innovation, funding, new ways of working, sustainability and all of that lot, and change your culture. There are ISO standards out there for environmental impacts. So again, if you look at your environmental strategies, there are simple wins that you can do. And that shows corporate responsibility. So there's corporate responsibility out there for promoting disability, supporting mental health, helping the environmental impact. And corporate responsibility just makes people feel good. It makes people feel that you're trying to do your bit as well. So you're being socially responsible. So what is your home? What is your service? What is your business doing to be socially responsible? Are they filling a niche part of the marketplace? What is it that they're going to do? And how are they accountable for that? And cultural competencies then. So again, we spoke earlier about opening up to different areas, thinking about how do we use culture to win business and talent. So looking at some of those models, your essay requirement for this, so your case study is a new organization starting up. We look at those different areas. So I'm not going to run into that one too much, but your assessment tools then, SWOT analysis, not a massive fan of SWOT. I think at this level, it's a bit basic, but you know what? It is a framework, so it does work well. Think about your endpoint assessment. You can't really get SWOT wrong, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Or you've got your PESTEL. Now, the PESTEL analysis, I think, works really well because it covers everything that we just talked about. So political, what happens if? How are you voting? What happens within your area? How does that influence your business? Economics, understanding where the money's coming from. Because if you're bidding for all these contracts in a very tight marketplace, all that's going to happen is you're going to be expected to do more for less. And is that actually achievable? So using your PESTEL analysis framework, there's lots of PESTEL tools that you can download. They are great appendices into showing sustainability and business models. So if you wanted to show CQC, true business sustainability, the PESTEL model is going to be great. Again, think about your tier 2 there. Looking at theories, so you obviously have to have theories behind the models that you use. There's the business model there that you can use, or resource-based view theory. So just have a look at those online, think about those. When I completed my master's, going back in 2018 sometime, the balanced scorecard worked really well. So you can download those. They're a great tool for just trying to get your point across, trying to even up, is this a good thing? Just trying to really get your head around stuff. So it's a really nice scoring system. Governance, accountability frameworks. So looking at how you're going to monitor that. So that could be your ISOs, it could be your investors in people, it could be in matrices, it could be disability stuff, your mental health stuff. So whatever your governance frameworks there are. Looking around your diversity and inclusion framework. So if you are having an inclusion champion or diversity champion, this is something that I would get them to do. Have a look at your audit tools. How are you going to present that data if challenged? How do you show that you're actively trying to promote inequality within your service? Technology assessment frameworks. So here you can see there's some technology assessment frameworks. Have a look at those, see what works really well for you. Within those frameworks, you can think about the tools that best fit what you're going to do, but part of continuity, part of sustainability, part of innovation. I would expect to see some kind of analysis around technology. And then looking at your political impact frameworks, So again, a bit more on the pastel, where understand politically what's going on is going to be absolute key to whatever it is that you are doing. So that's K2 done. I'll let you pause here, and I'm going to flick over to K6 now, where we can continue duty 1. So welcome back. We're now going to look at K6, which is ethics, values-based leadership theories and principles. And here we're just going to look at some basic principles around ethics. And here you can see, when we talk about ethical leadership, we're basically talking about justice, fairness, being a person of good character, understanding ethical dilemmas and making those ethical decisions. So ethical dilemmas could be, look, I've got this pot of funding. How do I spend it? What do I spend it on? And of course, that's an ethical dilemma, because you're going to have some people say the money should be spent here. You have other people say the money should be spent there. And your heart and your head says the money should go here. Of course, that's an ethical dilemma. But what if you can use your frameworks, you can justify why you've done what you've done. And I know what you're thinking, well, why should I have to justify what I've done if I'm a senior leader? Well, because we all hold accountability, which is an ethical principle. We all have autonomy, which is an ethical principle. And what we want to do sometimes is people to understand the decisions that we've made and why. So we haven't been influenced. We are critical analysis and critical thinkers, and we are able to make decisions based upon our own analysis. So having those ethical frameworks is really important for you to thrive as a leader. Equally, having your value-based leadership principles. So thinking about what drives you, what motivates you, what makes you think, what makes you tick, what makes you understand you. Because sometimes we can make decisions based upon our feelings that then can put us in a whole heap of trouble. So understanding where we think and feel is really important, because when we make a decision, we want to make sure that we're making the decision following our head, not necessarily our heart. Because again, unfortunately, business isn't about being liked. Sometimes it's about doing the right thing at the right time. And again, we see that all the time in politics. You know, if we look at political leaders, nobody envied Theresa May. Nobody's envied what Boris has done. And whether you like them or not, they've had to make really tough decisions. But they made their decisions based on their values. So we can think about leaders. We can think about Donald Trump. We can think about Margaret Thatcher. We can think about Theresa May and Boris Johnson and now Rishi Sunak. The reality is, you can always predict what they're going to do based upon their values. And ultimately, I think sometimes that's not necessarily a good thing, because we become predictable. People will understand what we're going to do next. And I always like to think that we should be able to be balanced in our views. So people should be able to see this balanced approach. And actually, if we're using balanced scorecards, if we're using pastel to make those decisions, ultimately the decision has been made for us with the tools in which we are using. So when we have to then justify why we said what we said, we have the tools to support us. Now, of course, those tools can then be bias driven. And what I mean by that is, we will look for the evidence. We can make a square fit a circle, of course, but being unbiased, trying to have that balanced view is really important. Equally, when we look at moral developmental stuff, so being moral in what we do, following those ethical standards, making sure that we don't set precedencies in which we can't undo. And what a precedency is, it's if we do something and we let somebody off, but we do it again and we don't let the next person off, we've already set the precedent. That behaviour has already been accepted. So be mindful that we treat everybody fairly, equally and equitably, and that we're not setting precedencies for one person or a group of people over another. Our virtuous ethics is actually a theory. So the virtuous theory, rather than the virtuous ethics, is based upon being virtuous, being honest and kind and caring. And again, you can see that there. So being mindful of our virtuous theories looks at our social responsibilities and trying to be more morally responsible, which moves us into the next one. So again, social responsibilities looks at how we behave as a leaders. So it may be the fact that the decision we're making isn't for now, but it's going to affect the long term. And sometimes we have the phrase short-term pain, long-term gain. I guess that's what politically we're going through at the moment. We understand the fact that we can't keep spending money that we haven't got. So how do we turn that around? So we have to go through this pain. And yes, of course, there are going to be winners and losers, but are we doing that virtuously? Are we leading by example? The stakeholder theory, so understanding the stakeholders, looking at their importance, looking at who's involved in there, so the employee, the customer, the stakeholders, the community members, that they're all involved somewhere in that voice. So we have a democratic system that we are listening to around our leadership. And I like to think that as an inclusive leader, we're taking that all into account anyway. So that's kind of moving into our ethical decision-making and our leadership styles, excuse me. And here, we're thinking about how we promote those behaviors, how we promote those standards, how we look at transformational leadership, and how we bring that all together. How we communicate ethically, so thinking about being open and honest. Is it the Shannon Weaver effect? Can it be misinterpreted? Is it inclusive? If we think about CQC, our Accessible Information Standards Act, is our information out there for all? And we live in such a complicated situation because now we've got fake news and people misinterpreting, or people finding an a hidden message in what we're saying. So when we do communicate, are we being very clear in what we're saying? Are we removing ambiguity? And again, working internationally, so thinking about those opportunities and the ethical frameworks and social impact. So if we are recruiting tier 2s or tier 4 workers, are we doing that legally, ethically, morally responsible? Because I worked 3 months in Bangladesh. I've seen the damage that happens to people and families when people aren't given the right opportunities. And it's sad, families come together to pay for these tier 2 and tier 4 visas, and on the hope that this person can come here, work, learn the skills, and support the family back. And what they're doing, they're selling their properties, their houses, their jewelry, and all of the families sell everything to risk this. So we're not just hurting one person when we fail, we're hurting lots of people, lots of families, and we cause unnecessary misery. So there is I have a real moral obligation to make sure that these tier 2s and tier 4 students or people that come here to work, we are treating them ethically and responsibly, because ultimately it's a representation of our values as a country if we're then letting them down. So when we think about ethics and decision-making, when you say something in a business plan, justify it. Don't just say, we're going to do this, justify it. If you say that you're going to do some social responsibility, justify it. Part of our virtuous theory, justify it. Then we start to have depth, we start to have analysis, we start to really understand that critical thinking which is required for level 7. So looking then at our decision-making process. So here is a case study there. Sarah's a senior executive for a healthcare organisation. She's committed to ethical practice as a value-based leader. And I'd like to think most people in health and social care, I said most people, who have been CQC endorsed have a particular value base within their leadership. And here, you need to think about how she would demonstrate her integrity, transparency, respect to stakeholders, ethical decision-making, ethical leadership, accountability and responsibility, how she promotes training and education, how she acts as a role model, and how she can audit this. As we go through, we have assessment tools and frameworks again. So think about your ethical decision-making assessment tools. Look at your 360 feedback. Under theories, look at the ethical leadership theory. Be confident with that. Understand the virtuous theory. So if you've done my level 5, you'll know that there's 3 that I want you to work to, but understand your virtuous theory. And then under frameworks, think about ethical decision-making frameworks, the ethics and compliance frameworks, value-based leadership frameworks, ethical culture frameworks, and your corporate social responsibility frameworks, because they make great tools for inspections. And if you are looking at writing a strategic plan, or you're trying to write a project, then having these frameworks embedded within them is really important, because you are going to show your critical thinking and analysis. So I'll let you pause there for a quick break as we then move on to KN13. So welcome back to KN13. This refers to the set of knowledge and skills related to external social and political environments to use thinking about your can't even say it, being diplomatic with your diverse groups of internal and external stakeholders. So let's just have a little look at this. So here we already spoken about your PESTEL assessment tool, but you're looking at your social and economical or political environmental impacts here. So you're looking at organizations that work well, look at what they're doing, look at how they work across their can't even speak now, the demographics. So demographics means age, population, people, area. And when we think about demographics, so for example, if we think of England in our head, demographics basically means, without stereotyping, and we're very careful about this, let's just say we would argue that the South provides more financial opportunities than the North. I know it's going to be a touchy subject, but I think if we look at the high-speed rail that's just been abandoned for the North, we've spent all the money in the South, the money's not gone to North. Again, a very social and political impact, because ultimately one could argue by levelling up the country, which was Boris Johnson's aim, we would have had faster movement of people and products. We haven't got that now because it's stopping halfway. So that would be your demographics. Or it may be that because there are less employment opportunities up in the North versus the South, it has a tendency to have a higher population of substance misuse or problems. So again, what you tend to see is in areas of the country, maybe northwest, I get my map in my head. So top of northwest, there seems to be a much higher proportion of substance and alcohol services than the South. So we can see where money is being spent based on economic decisions or demographic decisions. So that's kind of where I'm going with that piece of information. Equally, our stakeholder analysis. So looking at what stakeholders want, again, different stakeholders, different ideas, different concerns. So just making them part of that decision-making process and using that. So how do you get stakeholder analysis? Do you do surveys? Do you do short questionnaires? Do you look for themes or thematic themes? Or are you doing qualitative and quantitative data and research? Diplomacy, or thinking about understanding the principles of diplomacy, understanding how that engages with your diverse stakeholders, looks at kind of building trust, maintaining relationships, looking for win-win outcomes. And what I mean by win-win outcome means everybody fairly and equitably gets something from a project. It's not all just one side, it's not all just take. So, for example, I've looked at introducing a new care network. The idea of the care network is it becomes a win-win situation for everybody. It's not just me taking something from the government, but it's us giving back responsibly to the care homes to make sure that care homes have access to higher education, access to care champions, access to trainer modules, access to procurement, access to quality assurance, access to external influences, access to audit tools, whilst we then get the funding. So there's a win-win situation. It's not the fact that we're just delivering training and giving nothing in return. And that's what a win-win is. When you look at other organizations and you go, well, okay, whilst you're offering free training, there's no such thing as free. That's taxpayers' money. What are you giving in return? So that's where we're going with that. Looking at diversity and inclusion looks then at going back to this stakeholder piece, making sure that we're taking into account those backgrounds, those experiences, and really embedding that in everything that we do. And again, that corporate responsibility piece. So making sure that everything we do has corporate responsibilities. So our care network, that's me using our corporate responsibility, saying, look, we as healthcare professionals have a voice. We could use that voice in a very different way. So that's innovation. We're using technology to bring everything together. We're trying to do diversity and inclusion because we're opening this up to everyone fairly and equitably. We're trying to have a win-win situation where everybody is giving and taking. And obviously, we don't want any sofa service. We don't want people just taking because that's not sustainable. And looking at the social and political impact, we know we're in an aging population. So we know unless we start innovating now, we're not going to be ready for the future. So that gives you an idea of just a project that I'm working on, where that's all come from, just looking at this framework. So again, there's an example there, looking at your requirements. I'm not going to run through that with you. But the assessment tools here and the frameworks then, so you're going to start seeing a crossover here now. So we're looking at assessment tools around stakeholder analysis and looking at a public opinion survey. So the public opinion surveys is where you will get your leveling up, your win-winning from, because it's no point just saying, I think you need this here. You've really got to understand what people's views are before you bring something to them. Your theories around your stakeholder theory and your diplomatic theory, sorry. And then your frameworks then, again, back to your PESTEL, obviously, because it's your political, economical one. Social responsibilities that we've already looked at. But there is cultural intelligence frameworks, advocacy and lobby frameworking, and your conflict resolution frameworks. And conflict resolution frameworks work really well when you know you need to do something which is particularly unfavourable. Right, I'll let you stop there and we're going to move on then to K14. Okay, welcome back to K14 now. If you didn't pause, you'd just think, Steve, all you did was hold your breath and moved on, but here we are. So K14, working with the board and other company leadership structures. So as a senior leader, generally you are going to be one of the overall decision makers. However, if you're not on your own, then maybe you are working in a board of governance. So it is the case of understanding how your board of governance works, looking at the principles of board of governance, and then looking at that sign-off piece. So have you got to prepare your reports and drafts? Are those drafts and reports going through your board? And does that board then feed up to the chief executive officer? Is that how your organization works? So just understanding how you feed information to the top, but if you are the top and people are making it for you, it may be the case that actually, as your organization grows, you want people to use this process, because what you want to understand is by the time something comes to you, all of this legwork has been done, because ultimately you're there for the helicopter overview to be able to make these decisions quicker. And for you to make those decisions, then the examples of the PESTEL or the governance frameworks or the ethics frameworks, if you know that a piece work has gone through that, then that kind of goes to that value-based leadership. You can accept the fact that your governance is working well. Again, through your leadership structure, understanding various leadership structures, so understanding your management, understand how that works. So that may be your senior, your middle managers, your front lines, your supervisors, your team leaders, just, you know, however it is. And here's the thing. The more you have in that framework, it's quite clear through evidence, the more problems you end up with. So here's a bit of food for thought on this one. Now, obviously, I trained in the NHS. I love the NHS. I'm a complete advocate for it. However, one of the things that frustrates me with the NHS is it has this bottomless pit, and it shouldn't. It should be held accountable for what it is doing in its spending, unlike any other business. Now, here's the thing, and we're going back quite a few years. So I know these prices are going to be shockingly different now. So when I trained as a student nurse, it was costing £900 a day for a bed in the NHS. In a private hospital, it was costing the taxpayer £870 for a bed. How is it that we're losing the NHS because we can't afford it, but private hospitals are charging the NHS for their beds at £30 a bed cheaper than the hospital themselves? Surely, if that is the case, a more sustainable model for the NHS would be all of you private hospitals can bid for beds, offer the service cheaper than what we're offering it. Now, the question is, how can they offer it cheaper but still deliver high quality healthcare? And when you look at organizational structure, it makes sense, because right down at the bottom of the food chain, you still have your nurse, your two nurses, and your ward of patients. But the difference is you've got a hospital manager and a hospital director. In the NHS, you have multiple frontline roles. And I understand that you're going to come back to me and say, but Steve, there's a real difference in size and all that. Of course there is. Of course there is. But is that then it needs a company restructure? So for the NHS to carry on, it's not the case of giving it more money. It is the case of looking at where are we spending money that we don't need to spend it? Where is innovation? Where is advancing technology? Why is a private hospital able to deliver this cheaper than us? Where's the lessons learned? Where's the benchmarking? Now, the problem that you have here is if you have an empty or a bottomless pit of money that just has to keep being thrown at it, of course, there is never going to be a change that is significant enough. So it's a very tricky subject, but I just think when we look at leadership structure, are there lessons to be learned elsewhere? Hypothetical. I'm not for or against anything now, so I'm not forcing an opinion. So thinking about that, it's definitely worthwhile thinking. Strategic planning then looks at how we manage the organisation. Are all of those leaders and all of those people following the same values and values, ways of working? Do they all understand the same visions as the CEO? I think that's the hardest part, because we're led by our leaders and our managers, and I have seen some fantastic leaders in my time, and I have seen some diabolical leaders in my time. And what I don't understand, it is very easy to see a value-based leader or an inclusive leader versus one that is not. By the way they talk, by the way that they present themselves, by the way that they engage with their staff. So again, just thinking about those visions, values, and behaviours in which we expect. And there shouldn't be a power imbalance based upon this. Now, we can go back to some theories here about respect. When you talk to people, go, oh, but should respect be given or should it be earned? My theory here is you don't have to respect the person, but you should respect the position. Because if we don't respect the position people are in, then technically it's a real problem. You just have to like the person, but we should respect the position that somebody's in, because there are processes for managing this. Because ultimately we have to assume that somebody just didn't get that job and be in that position because they had no experience. They've got to where they've got to based upon some kind of recruitment process. And if that person becomes toxic or it doesn't work, then a whole review of that process should then take place to try and make sure that that doesn't happen again. Because finding inclusive leaders that are value-based is like finding gold dust. And it shouldn't be that way, should it? It should be a behaviour that we're all working towards the same values and principles. Change management then needs to be understood in an organisation. I've worked for a couple of organisations where they've turned and said, oh, we need this. It's Friday night, we need this. And you're like, well, okay, let's talk about toxic relationships here. I have the right to my time off. I need to rest. I need to recover. But equally, how is it now an emergency at 5 o'clock on a Friday and you need this by Monday, or you need this now? That's what I've never understood. It's Friday, but you need this by close of play Friday. What are you doing with that information at the end of Friday that couldn't wait till Monday in some way? So just think about the change management. We know change takes time. We know every job takes time. And I'd like to think as leaders, you understand roles and responsibilities and timeframes. At the end of the day, if one job takes an hour and they have to do 50 lots of that job, then it's 50 hours worth of work that you're asking them to do. They're not going to get that done by Friday from Monday. It's just an unrealistic request. But if you want to introduce new systems, then we have to accept the fact that that takes time. And we shouldn't be working towards unrealistic expectations, but we should be working towards change management that understands time management to implement processes more effectively. And again, communication strategies. So understanding the fact of how people feel and what they think and how that influences and how we as leaders at the top need a bit more resilience in the way in which if somebody speaks to us, I am very much an open book. I would expect my team to be very open towards me, because if somebody vents at me, if somebody tells me something, I don't take it as a personal attack. Unless I say, Steve, you're a complete whatever, then I might go, oh, that was personal. But if they say, I'm really disappointed in this, I can understand that disappointment. I can work where it's come from, and I don't need to defend it because they are entitled to that. What my role in that is maintain that honesty, because if I respond and shut it down, then I'm never going to get those clear lines of communication and influencing, and then that I can't then make decisions because I'm only ever getting half a story as a leader. So it's really important that we allow those clear lines there. And then finally, thinking about some of this then, going back to assessment tools, theories and frameworks, we've got our assessment tools there, which looks at a broad evaluation, our 360, our theories around the agency theory, looking at relationships between principals and stakeholders or members, looking at how we manage conflicts and how we work better in a board of directors. And there's the stewardess theory, focusing on how leaders act as stewards of organisations and how that allows us to collaborate, trust and shared values. Because if we don't have trust, if we don't have shared values, if we can't foster effective working relationships, then ultimately the organisation is doomed to fail. And it's role modelling from the front. Nobody wants to hear your bad day. It's your bad day. You're meant to own that. That's your emotional resilience. That's your emotional intelligence. If you are leading a team, you are there to support your team. you transferring your feelings onto them is poor leadership, because ultimately they're not there to carry your feelings. You're there to manage the organization, to have this innovation, to have clear governance, clear leadership, showing emotional intelligence and emotional resilience. If you're talking about your sacrifice, what you've had to do to get an organization to where it is, you almost set the culture and the behavior of, well, I've made a sacrifice, you need to make a sacrifice too. And that's not how it should work. That's not the behavioral modeling we want. So bear in mind that strong leadership is around the Studis theory, making sure that we're leading from the front, not behind, and we're not projecting our thoughts and feelings onto others. Frameworks there to have a look at. We've already discussed some of these in the past. We've got our corporate governance, we've got our broad effectiveness theory, we have our leadership development frameworks, we have succession planning frameworks, and the NHS do a lot of succession planning, so do social services. And then we have our collaborative governance framework. So again, thinking about the collaboration and the governance behind that for data sharing, consequences, legal, etc. So just be mindful for all of that. So that's the end of our theory for duty one. And we've whizzed through those requirements. Now up here, if we go to duty one, we have our PowerPoint presentations here. And again, here you can use these as tools just to work your way through. And just to have a read of those, really, they're there for you as well. So you can just have a look, and if you're more of somebody that wants to have the more visual in front of you, oh, it's down here, look. Again, you can use those to run through what it is that you're trying to achieve. Again, I may do that in some of the videos moving forward. And then finally, now let's just look at the end of duty one exam or assessment. So here you've got 10 questions that you need to answer. They are multiple choice. Maximum time is 1 hour. Most people it takes 20 minutes, if that. You just need to read the answer and answer them. Obviously 70% to pass, pass is 70 to 79, merit is 80 to 89, and distinction is 90 and above. All you're going to do is take the quiz, so hit that button, you get the questions there, you pop the answer in, and you just submit and save the quiz. So that's where you should all be by the end of this week. So I wish you all the best of luck. I can't wait to review that. And then next week, we will look at duty one and we look at the skills. And for the skills, again, helicopter tour over everything, but it's about thinking of all of the stuff that we've talked about in today's class, how you're going to start to embed that within your roles and responsibilities. And remember, duty one is your planning framework. So we're setting the tone and the behavior for that endpoint assessment. So it's really important that you watch this video in entirety, which you obviously have if you've got to this point, but if you just skip to it, go back. Watch this through, make sure you understand some of those theories and models, because I will ask you what PESTEL is. So it's not like I'm not going to test you, because I will know whether you've watched this lesson or not. Because ultimately, I want us to have the virtuous theory between us. I want to be able to trust you as senior leaders that you're taking part in everything. And obviously for us to collaborate and move forward, we need to have trust between us. So I wish you all the best of luck. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the session, and I will see you all next week for duty one skills. Take care. Bye for now.